cool. Is all of team proposition here? Prop. Westminster, are you here? I think they are. It's getting
Yes, we're here.
all right. Cool. Is JT here? Everybody?
Can we just have 1 second? Like we can set up this camera वगैरह.
Yeah, that's fine. But your entire team's here, right? All right, cool. Without further ado, I think I'll just do some of the formalities too. Welcome to the semifinal round of Sondhis. I think it's the 35th edition. Proposition LGS JT, opposition Westminster. Sorry, the other way around. Proposition Westminster Academy, opposition LGS JT. Without further ado, I call upon the first speaker for the proposition. Here. Also, I'll put timestamps into the chat throughout the debate. While at the same time, I encourage you guys to time yourselves. And prior to your speeches, please flag what your POI preference is. Thanks.
Scary, did we announce the motion?
Oh, we did not. I don't know the exact
Because
form.
is joined now. So just read out the motion as well.
Yeah, I'll just get it real quick. Excited.
That's okay. I got the motion. This house believes that capitalism has done more harm than good for the feminist movement, right? More harmful than...
Yes. I'll put it in the chat as well.
I'll do that. Perfect.
Excellent. There we go. All right, first prop. Here.
Am I both visible and audible?
Yes,
yes,
visible.
Okay, my pronouns are he/him, and I'll be taking POIs in the form of chat. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. A few pieces of contextualization before moving on to my argumentation. First of all, then, how does capitalism manifest in society? We tell you there are multiple ways. Number one, it can look like there being significant emphasis on getting jobs and creating maximized profit for individuals. Number two, it can look like a reduction in public spending, which is welfare and its initiatives for the sake of maximizing the development of industries within a society. Third of all, it can look like a creation of hustle culture wherein individuals are told that you need to get more and more jobs, work overtime, and be productive for a vast majority of your lifetime. What are then the goals of the feminist movement? Number one, it is to create a better situation around the world for women in all spheres of life, socially, economically, and politically. Secondly, it can look like increasingly the feminist movement is becoming more aware of intersectionality. This means that the movement now targets more minorities and communities within the global south. Third of all is general in nature, achieving equality for women. So, three arguments then. Number one, shifting focus from collective benefit to individual empowerment. Second argument about commodification of women. And third argument about creating exploitative practices. First argument then, we tell you capitalism has co-opted feminism by trying to create a focus on individual empowerment in comparison to collective liberation. It's called corporate feminism, whereas you focus on a few success stories and tell women that this could be you, rather than actually working to break the systematic inequalities collectively which exist within the society. The definition of feminism now has become to the point where individual women becomes individual women and CEOs, where politicians achieving success on the same level as men in terms of power, wealth, and status. We tell you then the goal shifts away from development or improvement of a community to tackle obstacles, but rather telling you to keep functioning within these flawed systems and trying to succeed within these systems in nature. We tell you corporate feminism champions or who are individual women who achieve success like CEOs, often not considering the privilege that got them there. The collective impact is that the feminist movement does not prioritize collective change, but you feel like you need to attain individual success in order to be successful as a feminist in nature. Examples like Oprah Winfrey, examples like Taylor Swift, or even Sheen being a female CEO doesn't mean that you achieved equality, because you still operate within a structure which is patriarchal in nature, which essentially means that this capitalistic feminism is tokenistic in nature. Hence, we don't necessarily think that capitalism is a good way to go about it. Second argument then. First idea on how capitalism perpetuates a girl boss narrative. The spread of capitalism for the feminist movement looks like the expectation for females to now work alongside carrying other duties that a woman is traditionally expected to cater to. We tell you that a facade of equality exists wherein both men and women go to work, but women in the status quo are also expected to take care of the house. This can look like looking after and nurturing children, cooking and getting groceries. This is called emotional labor alongside physical labor, wherein the narrative of girl boss means someone who can do everything and still be efficient and unbothered, which is practically impossible in nature. But the problem begins is that now women are expected to do everything and face tremendous burdens, where they're encouraged to juggle their home life alongside their work life and not say anything about it and remain silent. Secondly, then it shifts all of the blame of unequal access to opportunities from the society and its unequal systems to the woman herself. It looks like the reason you aren't successful enough or don't earn enough money is simply because you haven't worked hard enough, where you haven't been productive all of your life. This shifts the blame from actual societal issues and systems like discrimination or the wage gap existing to the effort of a woman and how much she's able to put in. We tell you that in itself is immoral and that deviates from the goals of feminism. Second idea then about the creation of a sex industry. The inherent reason a sex industry exists is because of the narrative that you need to create money no matter what, that you need to use and exploit all means available to you. It is an exploitative industry that coerces women to join with promises of glamour and large amounts of money, like the narrative that only fan models receive millions of dollars in a month's period of time. But the reality is that they end up receiving little to no compensation for the work they do within these industries. It started with the commodification of the woman driving up sales and advertising, where companies advertise attractive women alongside their products or their projects, which reduce a woman's value to nothing more than mere objects due to the capitalistic nature. This objectification existed because women believed the only way they could succeed in this capitalistic world is to use their body to earn money when there's no other way or avenues possible. This is why the industry in itself is coercive in nature, because it exploits the economic vulnerabilities of a woman. The sex industry is bad for a number of reasons. Number one, there are high rates of exploitation and abuse existing. Number two, there are power imbalances between the directors and women, which is why they're coerced to do actions they never would have consented to otherwise, because they also have contracts. Third of all, then, the mental health of women is compromised. When they're placed at high risk of things like STDs and trauma from being harassed or non consensual sex, in the absence of capitalism, a narrative to earn at all costs would have never existed in the first place. This is why the sex industry wouldn't have been as heavily commercialized, successful, or even popular within the current status quo, or let alone wouldn't even exist without capitalism. Last argument then about capitalism. Capitalism inherently relies and perpetuates socioeconomic hierarchies in the status quo. Because if all individuals have equal holdings of wealth, they would not have the incentive to innovate and be entrepreneurial in nature. This ideology disproportionately harms women, specifically those from marginalized communities. Why? Because women are likely to hold low paying jobs or part time employment due to multiple reasons. A, it can look like caretaking responsibilities at home. B, it can look like discrimination in employment and hiring processes. C, because of undereducation due to the stigmatization that exists within these countries on women getting education. And lastly, unequal pay and wealth gaps because women are seen as vulnerable actors in the status quo. Additionally,
Um,
capitalism emphasis on cost cutting also means that
We can't hear
companies
you.
we
don't
can't
have
hear
an
you.
incentive.
Is it only us?
Am I audible?
Yeah,
can
you were
see
We can't
clearly
hear you.
audible. Ek second. You were clearly audible for us. I think JT, you guys might have gotten disconnected.
Are you guys connected now? I stopped the timer.
I paused the timer.
Wait, can you
JT, are you now connected?
hear us properly? Yeah, we were always connected, but you were lagging.
Oh, I think it might have been your internet because everybody else could hear them properly.
Yeah.
So are you guys fine now?
Yeah, I think. Wait.
All right then. I stopped the timer at 6 minutes 47 seconds. I think the last thing that you were talking about is how women are unable to meaningfully compete in the capitalist system due to a lack of resources, opportunities, etc. You can begin from there.
Okay. Starting in three, two, and one. Additionally, capitalism's emphasis on cost cutting also means that companies don't have an incentive to provide targeted benefits to women like paid maternity leaves, child benefits, or nurseries, and even the gender equal pay. The impact of this on the movement is that such that their goals can never be achieved because due to things like poverty, financial instability, and wealth gaps that disproportionately affect women because they will never be equal to men and to a huge extent will be reliant on them to fulfill their basic needs. Example, provide them with access to housing, healthcare, and food. This means that women can never be liberated in the status quo. Last idea then about global capitalism, where capitalism prioritizes and thrives on cheap labor and low cost production. In the current world, this is manifested in the expansion of capitalism to the global south and the developing world. In search of cheap local labor and a way to bypass labor laws and restrictions, this has resulted in the setting up of sweatshops and factories with long hours and little to no breaks and very low pay and exposure to health risks. Note that women are the most vulnerable to these exploitative practices, which is why, because the nature of these industries is such that they're women extensive sectors, such as textile or garment manufacturing, or monotonous work associated with women. And since women have limited access to education and skill, they only have access to low quality jobs, whereas you also have limited union representation and worker rights. Thus, women are stuck in a cycle of poverty under the illusion of economic liberation and autonomy, but in reality, their standard of living is significantly worse off. Hence, we believe that capitalism has done more harm than good to the feminist movement and women in general. For all those reasons, please vote for Team Proposition.
Thank you for that fine speech. We now call upon the first speaker for the opposition to start the debate from their end. Here.
Can I just get 30 seconds?
Yeah, sure.
Wait. Yeah, am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. PY preferences in the chat, please. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Side proposition would have a very good case if this debate was whether capitalism is good or bad. But this debate isn't about that, panel. This debate is whether capitalism has been good for the feminist movement or not, insofar as their case isn't exclusive to feminism and all of their harms that they outline to you doesn't just apply to feminists, but applies to every single actor that isn't a woman. I don't think they can take this debate. But before I get into this, some key pieces of rebuttal. First, on corporate capitalism, the idea about how women have privileges and that's how they rise the corporate ladder. But here's what I want to tell you. Women who rise above this corporate ladder and women who are CEOs are actually have an incentive to actively advocate for more female employees within their workplace. But secondly, we think CEOs who rise the corporate ladder don't say this, who've gone up the corporate ladder, they actively go out and tell people about their experiences, right? They actively go out and tell women how their experience with the capitalist system went and the problems that they faced. And we tell you this is important insofar as women can then be inspired by them, and women can actively have an incentive to go out and make sure that they don't go through the same problems as the CEO did. But secondly, their idea about girl bosses, about how women can do whatever they want. We tell you this is good, panel. We think in the absence of capitalism, the only existing narrative that existed was that women are useless, that women can't do anything. We think with the advent of capitalism, this narrative that women can do everything that they can, that a man can, we think that women can make as much money as a man can exist. But thirdly, the idea about how capitalism doesn't provide access to opportunities for women. And here's where they talk about sex industry. I think the sex industry isn't very coercive in nature, right? I think in the sex industry, you have things like consent, etc. But most of this isn't just about capitalism. But most of this isn't about why this harms the feminist movement. We tell you this is basically about whether capitalism is bad or not, and this is not what the debate is about. But moving on to my argumentation, we have two argumentations. First, on the historical benefit of capitalism to the feminist movement. Secondly, the contemporary benefit for capitalism. But before I go into my framing, I'll take a PY if there's any. 1, 2, 3. No PY. First, on framing, what does capitalism look like? We think capitalism is not a perfect panel, and we're going to be very generous. We concede that capitalism is not perfect. No system on earth is perfect. We think capitalism can then take 5 examples, can manifest ways to 5 ways. First, we think capitalism is rooted in libertarianism, personal liberty, and individual rights. We think the underlying basis of capitalism is basically progressive values. Secondly, we think it's interested in the economic value of individuals, right? i.e., what each individual can contribute, right? We think at that point in time, capitalism has an incentive to make sure that every person is useful to the economy in one way or another. Thirdly, we think it prioritizes wealth creation and wealth creation. Fourthly, we think it's inextricably tied to the birth of myriad other things. We think this looks like modernism, but also postmodernism, right? But fifthly, we think capitalism was the foundation of many modern day systems. And this is not just exclusive to capitalism. We think it also has an incentive to seek capital for the foundation of historical goods. Sixthly, we think capitalism today has to prioritize issues like image as well, and has an incentive to seek economic contribution to the nth degree. Having exhausted many resources, we think it must be indiscriminate in who it allows to participate in the benefits. First argument then on the historical benefit of capitalism. A couple of history lessons I want to give you. One, we think the invention of printing press, i.e. the age of enlightenment, led to capitalism. We think at that point in time, people wanted to dispense information, news about things they thought around them were important, right? And we think the first use of the printing press was in China, right? Where a bookseller wanted to sell books. We think at that point in time, the capitalist system was linked to the printing press. We think at that point in time, people wanted to sell their goods that they made, right? i.e. the writings that they made. And we think this led to a bandwagon effect in terms of people wanting to sell more stuff. We think this led to the notions of creation of wealth, production of goods, etc., etc. We think that's when the first market system was created. That is to say that traders, merchants in China, and led to the introduction of bazaars, etc., i.e. the Silk Road. We think this eventually led to the hyper-production of goods, i.e. demand and supply chains being developed within countries. And to make things easier for them, we think at that point in time, this gave rise to the Industrial Revolution. This is important in the context of World War I, right? Where women got voting rights, i.e., the suffragette movement. We tell you this is important insofar as men went into wars and women were left in Britain to take over industries, right, and basically replace men. We think at that point in time, the state realized the economic output of women, right, where they previously thought of women as just incubators or just useless in terms of the economy. We tell you this led to a drastic change of the mindset of the state and the perception that women had within the economy insofar as they contributed to the economy itself. But we think capitalism is also linked to distribution of power and choice, i.e., libertarian ideologies like individual freedom and liberty, right, i.e., that you can earn as much as you want, right. Things like the American dream, etc., exist. That is to say that it's good for people to contribute to the economy, etc., etc. But we think this also led to things like modernization, right, things like education. But secondly, we think this also led to post-modernization, i.e., media and how it's decentralized. But we think this is important insofar as most social justice movements rely on social media, etc., for their campaigning, but also how they generally amass a lot of support. The reason why I know about the Black Lives Matter movement, but also the other feminist movement, is because of social media platforms, right? But secondly, what were the alternative sources of ascribing values before the advent of capitalism? We tell you this was things like biology, right, where women are generally more inferior and women are generally considered to be weaker than men. But secondly, we tell you this was religion, which actively made sure that women aren't respected in society. Thirdly, we tell you this was monarchy and the idea of absolute primogeniture within states. Secondly, a second argument then about contemporary benefit to feminism, right? Before I go on, I'll take a PY. PY. First, on capitalist incentives to cater to women. A couple of structural reasons I'll give to you here. One, we think women are a market to tap into. We think this looks like the economic output that they have. Secondly, we think women are generally units of economic productivity. We think previous narratives that women aren't good enough, right, existed. We think insofar as capitalism existed, you gave them something to be good at. And we tell you this is important insofar as this drives research. Things like women are just generally better than men at academics, etc. We tell you this is important insofar as people realize what women are actually capable of. Thirdly, we think capitalist system wants to encompass the world, right? Things like globalization are very important parts of capitalism. Fourthly, we think capitalism cares about innovation, diversity, and technology, etc. Fifthly, we tell you that capitalism is extremely trendy. This looks like media capitalism, etc., that are existing. But sixthly, virtue signaling that exists, right? Capitalist system wants to be seen as good. But secondly, what's the demonstration of the benefit of contemporary benefits of capitalism, right? We tell you this is important in the case of political representation that women have, and we tell you this is a direct result of the economic output that they had. Insofar as they can lobby this and gain long-term change, we tell you this is important insofar as capitalism has done more benefits than it has harms.
Thank you for that fine speech. We now call upon the second speaker for the proposition to further their case. Here.
Can I just get 30 seconds?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, am I visible and audible?
Yes, but आवाज बहुत आहिस्ता आ रही है.
Am I audible right now at this volume?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay. Yeah, just give me a second. Okay. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. I just want to make one clarification off the top. We do not have the burden to present you an alternative. This debate is simply about whether or not capitalism, the benefits that they provided, were they like greater or less than the harms, right? Two classes for you then. Firstly, on corporate feminism and individual benefit, and whether or not that's like a good impact for you to run. And then secondly, other advents of capitalism, right? On to the first class, then about corporate feminism and individual benefit. Team opposition's claim here is that when people are raised on the corporate ladder and when capitalism has incentives of libertarianism, you will care about other women and you'll talk about their own story. I have a couple of responses to this. Firstly, I think whoever is raised on the corporate ladder in the system of capitalism will always be elitist in nature. Because note, the women who are able to access the benefits of capitalism will always be privileged women. Because capitalism functions on an ideology of scarcity and competition amongst the masses, wherein there's a limited holding of wealth and there's limited positions existing. Therefore, everybody is competing against one another and there's like scarcity existing. Therefore, the women who will always be above in this competition are the women who have not faced discrimination previously. This looks like white women in the global north just being significantly better off than like black women or African American individuals, African American women within the global north. Why is this so? Because they haven't faced things like colonialism, slavery, and other like systemic injustices that other women have. So within the global south, when you have faced colonialism, you will always be worse off, right? When you face like things like ethnic discrimination, you will always be worse off. Therefore, the only women who have the capacity to access any benefits of capitalism will always be elite women. Why? Then this is not a good enough impact. This is not a good enough impact for a couple of reasons, right? Firstly, I think it's just tokenistic in nature, right? When you use these women as a scapegoat and say that the reason you all other women are failing is because of your individual capacity, right? And the fact that you're working hard enough. This is a really huge harm because that means your feminist movement is not functioning on like collective change, but it's functioning on like individual benefit, right? When you're not organizing protests to take down systemic injustices, like systemic racism, like things like provide reparations for women who faced harm through like previous past injustices. I think because of this tokenistic idea, this is really harmful. That you're benefiting these individual women. I think the second response to this then is that that this is literally just false, right? Because no, the profit incentive means that you will always prioritize things like making profit and cutting down on cost. How does this manifest? It manifests in two ways. I think firstly, these women who become CEOs in the system, these tokenistic already existing white women, what will they do? They are likely going to entrench injustices even more. Why? Because they also have an incentive to make that profit because they came into power through that system, right? Because they want to maintain that power and be on top, they will make sure that you're like continuing in the same pattern because otherwise that system will take you out, right? So I think the profit incentive always means that you will entrench injustices. I think my first speaker explained to you how you have things like global capitalism where you have sweatshops existing within the global south. This is an inherent harm of capitalism. Note if you do not have global capitalism, these women would not have to face like 20-hour workdays when you have like no health regulations and no labor laws. These are exclusive harms of capitalism that are so great, right? The only benefit that they then bring is through like the only benefit that they then bring is for like these individual already privileged women, which I've already explained, are smaller in number and are used as a scapegoat. Thus is not a good enough benefit, right? What were our arguments then revolving around corporate feminism that they then did not properly engage with? The idea of the sex industry. What the vast majority of women who enter the sex industry aren't people who want to enter into the sex industry because the sex industry by its very nature is coercive. When you're put in like very vulnerable situations where you can't say no to sexual activities, when you have the risk of attaining STDs, and this is not just about like OnlyFans, etc. It's prostitution houses or like unregulated prostitution houses within the global south or within like the global north, like really poor areas. This is a really important argumentation that they need to cater to because it relates to like the objectification of women and the associated harms of the sex industry, right? Where now you see women only as objects and like you have things like increased harassment within areas because of the consumption of pornography and things like that, wherein men's like mental perception of women is just like worse off, right? Then on to the second class, the idea of like other advents of capitalism. I do not think it's an important argumentation that JT realistically brought about. They said you had like the printing press and social media because of capitalism, right? I think the people who invented these things, they did not just have the incentive to invent for the sake of creating for the sake of profit, right? Because no, inventors, what do they look like? I think they're really invested in their field, right? I think they really invested in their field. I think they have a love to create, etc., and they want to spread information. For example, so for example, you had like example of Tesla, right? Wherein he like ripped apart his patents, etc. Because the vast majority of inventors do not just like go into like a really scientific, hectic field that is like and that has really high barriers to entry solely for like money. Because if you wanted to solely make money, you could go into other fields that are like less
Guys,
pressuring,
we
right?
had a lot to happen.
Um, can you
I
hear me
think like
now?
the last like couple of sentences we weren't able to hear at all. Very sorry. We can hear you a little bit better. We're just gonna try to fix our internet. Just give us 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we're back. Could you please talk so we could check if we can hear you?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, we can hear you. All right. Sorry about that. We have some internet problems going on.
Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, what's the last thing that you heard?
The last thing that you said was something along the lines of, if these inventors had a profit incentive, then they would probably do something else.
Okay, yeah, but like I was asking like JT, should I like continue from like this point or should I continue from the point that they like stopped hearing?
Yeah, you can continue from that point. I think.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. I think in the absence of capitalism, you could have had inventions because people would have the incentive, like for example, in the printing press to spread information, right? So previously, when you didn't have the printing press, like people came together in community centers, etc., to spread information. So you will always have an incentive to create these things, right? Like the printing press. So similarly for social media, right? It's spreading of information is something that's important to people. Being knowledgeable about things is important to people. That's why a lot of times like, newspaper industries are something that are nationalized by your government, and you're provided a lot of times you provide a lot of times subsidies for these newspaper industries, so everybody has access to this information because these informative things are just really important. They stand regardless of profit incentive, right? Because they have like greater overarching benefits for your society. Our arguments that they did not engage with, right? The idea of girl boss, wherein you like wherein you put like double burden on women, and then you're told that they can do anything without like actually dealing with structural inequalities. So what does this look like? This looks like a woman going to work with her husband, coming back at 5 p.m. and then doing all the labor at home without her husband picking up a finger. This is an argument that they did not engage with. I think a woman would have been better off if she would just had stayed at home and like had like done the housework instead of having this double burden on her, right? These are all arguments that they do not engage with. My own positive argumentation then about consumerism. Note the rise of capitalism has led to an increase in consumerism and consistently urging individuals to buy products. This has detrimentally impacted women for two reasons. I think firstly, the creation of beauty industries that disproportionately profit off of women's insecurities. This looks like you selling anti-aging creams before you're 30, or like advertising like cover up your skin problems with makeup, etc. These are all things that exist because of consumerism. This harms the feminist movement because A, you do not feel secure in your own body, and this is something that's only accessible to elite women, right? Because you can only purchase makeup and all of these things when you have like enough savings of wealth, right? The second way that harms consumerism harms women is climate change and climate-based disasters. This is a really important argumentation here, right? Because note, consumerism, which looks like the excessive consumption of goods and disposal of goods, drives climate catastrophes. This harms women in two ways. I think firstly, climate disaster leads to like displacement and migration. So, for example, in Pakistan, when you had the Balochistan floods, there was a lot of displacement. This leads to a breakdown in social structures where women become increasingly vulnerable. This is really important. I think the second way climate catastrophes harm women is that in the aftermath, you do not provide proper aid to these women because their needs aren't catered to. This was like again in the Pakistan floods when women weren't given access to like period products. All of these I think are really important because climate change is a harm that exclusively impacts women on the global south who will always be more vulnerable. What have we proven to you throughout this debate? That in their best case of individual liberty, white women will always be better off. This is not a good enough impact because these women were always privileged in the first place. Stand for the global south, stand for Westminster.
Thank you for that speech. I now call upon the second speaker for the opposition. Here.
Yeah, can I just get 30 seconds? Okay. Am I audible? We won't be turning on our camera because we're having some internet.
That's fine. Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Just a second. Setting up the camera. Okay. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The motion is very carefully phrased by the motions committee, I'm pretty sure. This debate is not just the feminist movement as it exists today. This is about historically how capitalism as an ideology that grew and replaced other ideologies like religious conservatism, like ideologies like primogeniture and monarchy, etc., was something that was good and brought certain institutions to the world, certain systems that allowed for the space that was necessary for feminism to exist in the first place. That is to say that the crucial strategic reason why our proposition can never win this debate is that they ignore the comparative. If their only claim is poor people cannot climb up the ladder or poor women cannot climb up the ladder, they ignore the comparative. That comparative that historically, in the absence of capitalism, in the absence of the idea that anyone can possess wealth and it is good to be wealthy and it is something where everyone can actually have this as a pursuit within their life and that is all right. You know what structures around the world told you about things like moving up the social ladder? Social mobility, probably number one, wasn't even a concept, but it looked like how women, etc., were locked out of inheritance systems, right? The only way that had any social mobility, like prehistoric times, etc., or like more like times centuries ago, etc., was that you would inherit wealth from your family, etc., right? Because you did not have private enterprise, etc., and you did not have the concept of social mobility. If that is the case, if that is the actual way that they wanted these women to climb up the ladder, we think that women were locked out of inheritance or these traditional economic institutes, etc., right? It looks like also things that we reference in terms of absolute primogeniture, right? You literally could not have a male heir in the family in terms of these structures. These are all of the values that traditional society espoused before capitalism came and said that, you know what, these are not the values from which you should judge people by. And that's the most important clarification I need to make at the start of my speech. That is to say that what are values and what are rights? That what provides rights within society or what provides the capacity to do things in society is how much value society ascribes to you and what it can potentially ascribe to you. Traditional notions of ascribing value to people were based on biology, were based on religion, etc., were based on conservative ideals like primogeniture. However, what did capitalism particularly do? You changed these notions of ascribing value to people. You said that it does not matter what gender or race or ethnicity you are or what religion you are from. Those things are not what matter, but actually the economic productivity. That was the first movement in the world that was actually indiscriminate in terms of how it treated people. Why is this so important? Because insofar as capitalism is indiscriminate, capitalism was the first ideology that actually did this and provided a means for people to move up the social ladder or had new notions of ascribing value to people that also ascribed value to women, etc. We think at that point in time, our proposition has lost debate. Why? Because they say that they don't need an alternative. I think they would. I don't think that you need an alternative in any debate. You don't need to win a semi-final either. But I think an alternative is the only way that they could have won this debate in the first place, right? But then let's talk about how this is actually how the etc. has historically led to feminism having a place within society. This is extremely important. We think that capitalism has created space for feminism, right? This looks like the Industrial Revolution and why the suffragette movement happened in the first place. Very important parts of history that are extremely important that side proposition cannot just write out of our history books or feminist theology, etc. Right? We think that at that point in time, what is very important.
Yeah, they've left the meeting.
Yeah, I think वो disconnect हो गए एकदम से. ये ना हो कि वो मैं चेक करती हूँ. Let me check if they've connected.
They've texted in the chat box. They say that we are connecting from our speaking device, so they're reconnecting in the process.
Oh, okay.
Aage. Hello, can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay, so where did we become inaudible because we didn't realize that we.
I think the last thing you were talking about was how capitalism made a space for feminism, and then you were referring to the suffragette movement, but didn't elaborate very much before getting cut off.
Okay, and is the timestamp accurate?
I believe so. Perhaps give or take 5 seconds.
5 seconds का I think gap था.
Okay, ठीक है. All right, thank you. Can I restart?
You want to resume your speech or restart your speech?
No, like resume.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Just a second. Yeah, your headphones के बाद. Okay. All right. I'll be restarting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So we're talking about the major issue of this debate, right? Whether capitalism has created space for feminism or not. Proposition's only response to this argument, by the way, is just not responding. And I don't think that's enough, right? Because again, we told you literal specific examples in history, points in time in history, where the fact that capitalism existed, the fact that you needed productivity and you needed workers and you needed women within supply lines was the reason why they became economically productive. At that point, you had to ascribe value to that particular community, value that they had never received previously. And what happened then? They actually were able to get voting rights within the United Kingdom's voting system, and that was the first ever political representation that women got in history. I think at that point in time, you cannot ignore these examples. But what else did we tell you? The reason why the printing press, etc., is important is because that is what sparked the Age of Enlightenment. They said that, oh, you would have done this in community centers because you want to share information anyways. But sharing information with your community is very different from information proliferation, which now exists today, where social justice movements are able to collectivize through books, etc., through literature, first of all, and then also through social media and media, which exists because of capitalism. But also, they would not have done this. Why? Because it wouldn't be profitable for them, right? Again, we told you that a Chinese bookmaker who wanted to sell books was the person who invented the printing press, right? Capitalism creates unique incentives for information proliferation, for media, etc., to be proliferated throughout the world, and that was the basis and the main mechanism that social justice movements use in order to actually collectivize in a meaningful way. But also, We talked about then the suffragette movement, right? And also then we talked about how that led to modernism, etc. The point we made about modernism was that the fact that you needed workers within the firms, etc., meant that you could not be indiscriminate in terms of worker productivity, right? You created education to create skilled labor, etc., and how education was something that was lucrative. This was especially beneficial for women. Why? Because these things that we're talking about, things like voting rights, things like education, etc., things like the media, these were not accessible to women in any way on their side of the world where capitalism never existed. What you had for centuries was a system that systematically locked out women, and they were not able to benefit from these very systems. That is the comparative, and they provide no alternative of why this would have happened or how that could have came to be in the absence of these particular exclusive mechanisms that we tell you.
He's gone again.
Yeah, I think they disconnected. I think it's just their internet because I
Yeah.
think internet सही चल रहा है.
Oh well.
इनको अपनी इंटरनेट अगर कोई और डिवाइस है तो वहां से कनेक्ट कर ले.
Okay, we've joined from a different device this time. Are we audible? We're really sorry about the connectivity issues.
You're
Yes.
audible, लेकिन आप I don't know, like just test your internet because बार-बार disconnect हो रहा है. Speed check कर लो
Yeah.
speed सही है कि नहीं.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay, we've started getting mobile data, so hopefully that works better. Okay. Are we audible?
Yes.
Okay, just a second. What was the last thing you heard? And what was the last thing you heard, by the way?
Last thing that I heard was that education, voting rights, all of these things, women were locked out of this.
Okay. All right. I was restarting my speech resuming my speech in 3, 2, 1. So capitalism uniquely created or unlocked certain structures for women that allowed them the necessary social mobility, that allowed them the necessary information and education, etc., that allowed them the necessary platforms through social media and the decentralization of media, which happened because of postmodernity. And that is all a consequence of capitalism. Because in the absence of capitalism, other ideologies that were prevalent throughout the world were those of hyper-religiosity, those of monarchy, etc. That is the alternative that they had to contend with. The fact that they did not give one means that they cannot win this debate. But also, in terms of other things, we think that if they talk about the global south, etc., we think we can win that clash as well, because it was the reason that you had things like media proliferation, or the fact that you had comprehensive education systems, that you had a transfer of ideas from more liberal societies or Western liberal democracies towards the global south. That is to say that in the absence of this, feminist movements would have had very, very concentrated change for women, or pockets of change, etc. We think that's something that should not have would have been the limitation on their side if you did not have global media and globalization and the global transfer of ideas particularly. But also, let's talk about the contemporary Let's talk about the contemporary benefits of that capitalism has for women, etc. They only talk about one thing, that women are extremely selfish and individualistic, etc. We think that even if white women are championing changes, etc., and even if they have rights right now, I'm not sure why that's unfair. Because 100 years ago, these women could not even vote. I think that change is also something significant. I'm not sure why they're being demonized or taking advantage of a system that had locked them out previously. But also, macro changes matter. This looks like even if women, privileged women, etc., only want more rights, etc., for themselves, they would probably have to do that through legislation, etc. And those macro changes have trickle down effects on even the most vulnerable of actors, etc. Right? They talked on manifestations of capitalism like you don't have meaningful competition. But also note that this is much, much better than before. Where were you 200 years ago at the point in time that they're saying you will never be equal? I don't think that is true, because again, capitalism is not rooted in religious theology, etc. It is not something that needs to be discriminatory. They said that you're going to have expectation of feminism like the triple shift. No, you don't, because you're still going to maintain productivity, so you're not going to pressure them too much. This looks like the first concept of maternity leaves that ever happened within the world was because of the fact that women had to work. Because you want to ensure their productivity, you also take care of these individuals. The first needs that you thought in terms of pregnancy difficulties emerged out of jobs, etc. But also, you don't shift the blame from discrimination to merit. Categorically, this is untrue, because in capitalism, you have decentralized media and counter narratives, etc. This looks like Anne Oakley, who published the most comprehensive gender pay gap research proving it, who literally talked about how she funded her college education and her research because of a small business that she started. At that point in time, liberation is something that you only have, and you choose how to live your life, even if you work in the sex industry. I'm not sure why that is a taboo. That taboo is rooted in religious theology and patriarchy. I think that women on OnlyFans, etc., can use that to actually decide how the rest of their life is, a choice they never had, historically speaking, for all given reasons. Clearly, JT.
Thank you for that speech. Just like on housekeeping, kindly do not exceed the 8 minutes 30-second marker, especially, but it's fine this time because you timed out. Anyways, third proposition, here.
Right. Am I visible and audible?
Yes to both.
Perfect. All right. Let's be starting. Just one second. Right. I'll be starting in 3, 2, and 1. Notice the blatant squirrel that they make of this debate, right? They try to tell you that this debate is not simply about the harms versus benefits of capitalism. I simply don't think that is true. They cannot take this debate on that idea. Because no, when you're talking about if capitalism has been harmful or beneficial to the feminist movement, then you're talking about capitalism in isolation. You're not talking about the existence of further ideologies or how they may have benefited. But even then, we tell you, in the absence of capitalism, no matter what social structure would have existed, it is not focused on massive profit maximization. On those grounds only, women would have been so much better off. Even if we have a policy, we take this right then and there. But then, first on to their entire idea about history and how we have historically made things better for women. I don't think that is true. That's really shocking. This is the first clash within this debate, right? Firstly, on history, then. Let's women would have historically been worse off because of capitalism. They say the suffragette movement existed because of World War I. I don't think that is true. World War I actually delayed the suffragette movement by a large amount. This means that had World War I not existed, capitalism not existed, we would have gotten voting rights much, much, much sooner. But then secondly, we think that on a comparative level, in absence of capitalism, you would not have this demarcation between social classes being... Sorry?
He was asking a point.
I'm sorry, I thought they cut off. I'll continue from here. I'll restart in 3, 2, and 1. In absence of capitalism, demarcation between classes would never existed. So this looks like you would never have a poor class that was never allowed to vote and then lords that were allowed to vote. Rather, the right to vote would have been granted to every single individual in existing. So that means that you would never have had to fight for rights, firstly for poor people and then for women. Rather, you would have gotten suffragette much, much, much earlier. But then thirdly, we think women would always have continued the feminist movement because it is not contingent on the idea of industrialism. Because we think women women had been gathering and talking for way more before that. This looks like women and the culture of gossiping existing much before it was villainized due to the capitalist culture of individualism. Women used to gather at tea parties and literally discuss events, and that was how feminist movements and large information was spread through that. We think capitalism literally hinders all of this, wherein your sense of community is broken down, and rather you become more individualistic in nature. That is why it's been delayed significantly in current day and time. But then, on the idea of how they say that we're reducing all forms of social biases because of capitalism, it's a blatant lie. Because of capitalism, you now have capitalism fueled with religious biases, with indigenous biases, and how the literal idea that capitalism creates a proletariat class. That means you need to have somebody to discriminate for capitalism to exist. For hoarding of wealth to exist, you need to have somebody who you're keeping the wealth from. At that point in time, you always have biases existing. Classism exists simply because of the existence of capitalism. On those grounds, the existence of capitalism allowed you to use that as a tool to now racially profile people. So now literally tell people that because you're not rich enough and you're black, because you're not rich enough and you're a woman, we can oppress you. We don't think this is how you're actually benefited women. But then they say capitalism replaced other ideologies and how they had been so much better. Note how that's a problem, because capitalism, rather than replacing ideologies, simply co-opted other ideologies. So they got religious fundamentalism, how you generally have religion going alongside and creating a nuclear family structure, things like that. We don't think this is true. We think capitalism itself co-opted certain theologies and then forced itself and its principles onto them. So, for example, with the idea of a nuclear family, capitalism co-opted that and created this idea of buying single unit houses for more people to continue consumerism, for products to be marketed as only for moms, only for dads, only for kids, so that people buy more and more products. For capitalism literally co-opted all of these ideas, including religion, including other theologies, simply because it wanted to make more profit regardless of the theory. At that point in time, all of these ideologies coexist with capitalism, which in itself is problematic. Their argument does not stand. But then, this is Nash, but where are women better off? Because the only push to this is that, hey, we benefit white women, are fine with that. I don't think that's true, because that is not the goal of the feminist movement. We think it has harmed women significantly, wherein the only benefit you're able to prove is to white women, because that means that benefit is concentrated to the elite class. But then note how that's better on our side of the house. Because of the fact that we tell you that we would never have the sex industry existing, analysis they never cater to. We would never have such stringent harm on women through the climate change movement, analysis they never gave to us, wherein in disasters, women are literally denied period products simply because you don't want to give them social welfare, because that goes against the principles of capitalism. And now because of consumerism, you have increased global warming. All of these exclusive harms of capitalism for the feminist movement. But then the literal idea that even if these white women are even put into positions of power, they're expected to have emotional labor alongside physical labor. Analysis we gave to you still standing within this debate. We believe women are significantly better off, even white women on our side of the house, simply because they don't have to cater to all of these extra responsibilities. But then note how they're exclusively bad in this clash. Because on their side of the house, women in the global south are literally expected to earn. Women in the global south are then literally harmed because of this idea, wherein they're not able to earn much, so they go out and do sewing jobs, where they're sewing and paid per piece for every piece of cloth that they then spew out. So this looks like sweatshops existing. Amazon workers and specifically hiring women because they know they'll agree to lower wages. This expectation on women then drives them to drastic actions like these, drastic actions like joining the sex industry. All of this would never have existed had capitalism not existed, which is why women are better off on our side of the house. Last clash then, right? I'm going to talk about the idea of the use of information, how use of information was so essential for driving the feminist movement. We don't think this is true for a couple of reasons. See, we believe the feminist movement in itself would have continued to exist in the absence of any form of use of information or proliferation of avenues that they talk about. Because things like social media and printing press, all of these are avenues of spreading out the movement. The movement itself would still have existed, guys. And then, most of it's still better off on our side of the house. But all of the things that they talk about, like spreading information, literally go against capitalist ideas. This looks like, for example, Facebook would have been created, but it cost you money to make Facebook. It cost you time and energy with no return, guaranteed return, to create Facebook. Instagram and Meta then are examples of capitalism. But the idea is innovation and invention simply exist counter to, for example, capitalism. This is because it costs you money to make that. There's no guaranteed return, and people literally go out of their corporate jobs to be able to create. At that time, I think spread of information is much better on our side of the house. But before I move on further, a point short.
This is an example of
before the suffragette movement was helped by the fact that women went into factories and proved that they had economic productivity. The fact that they could be something other than just a homemaker. You did not have any actual effect of the feminist movement. How would that have happened in the absence? Please give us an alternative, even if it's the third problem.
Sure. I think this idea is flawed in nature because you believe that women's utility came from the fact that they proved themselves to be men and proved themselves to be someone they are less successful as a man. So, for example, when women gained salaries, that's how they were productive. I think that's flawed. In absence of that, what you would have had is you actively realizing the importance of a woman as a domestic homemaker, a woman as a person who actively granted you benefit in terms of the specific qualities that she held. At that point in time, you're likely to give them those benefits rather than them having to prove themselves inside a patriarchal structure. I think on their side of the house, the suffragette movement is not contingent on women going into factories, but rather on the amount of conflict that women and dissent they created. And that dissent is simply contingent on community and where you're able to garner traction as a community and create more louder voices for the feminist movement. We think simply on grounds of the fact that you have a larger community on our side because no individualistic principles exist, simply because you're able to garner more women, garner more people to be able to go out and actively create change. That never happens on their side of the house because the primary principle they have is to be individualistic and garner money and success for themselves. That never happens on our side of the house on those grounds proposition.
Thanks for that. We now move on to the reply. Oh, sorry, third speaker for the opposition. Here. Third op, are you there?
Yeah, I'm just starting. I'm just reading my notes. That's like 5-10 seconds. Okay. Timer सही कर देना. Here. Thank you. Okay. I will be starting my speech in.
क्या हुआ?
ये वाला ये तो नहीं ये. Okay. I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Notice a very glaring concession at third prop because at third prop they're like, guys, women only got to get rights because they portrayed that they were like men. They portrayed that they got the right to assert that when they got salaries. What provided you salaries in the very first place to begin with? It was capitalism, because he recognized that during the industrial revolution you had men that went out to war, etc. So these were the only people that could look after factories, could actively look after the production techniques, etc. At that point, that is something that's true. But notice how some parts of the case are simply not a part of this debate. Why is that so? Because a big chunk of like the third argument, when I saw the goals of capitalism can never be achieved, are simply not a part of this debate, because it does not matter as to what would happen in the future insofar as we're thinking of it in a retrospective manner. So insofar as all of their ideas about how you're going to have more poverty, etc., I'm unsure as to why that's applicable in a vast majority of cases. But okay, then what am I going to do within this speech? I'll prove to you on I have 3 issues within this debate. Okay, then what's the first issue? The first issue is the moral issue. What do we tell you within this? We tell you that historically
capitalism is rooted in liberty, is something that feminist movement had a lot of benefits due to capitalism. We give you strict structural reasons. Number one, that you had the innovation of the printing press, etc., due to which you had the age of enlightenment, in which you had you could have dispensed information. Our ideas about how this was the only way through which you could get voting rights, etc., through suffrage, etc. We've proven as to how there's a link to distribution of power, etc. We've talked about education, media, all of that stuff. What was then the response to all of that? The response is pretty funny. The only response that they then have is that you only did that for profit. You simply cannot attain the benefit because it wasn't intended, or the purpose wasn't that in the very first place. Here's the thing, right? We simply not as to what the purpose was, insofar as you're simply benefiting of that, or the simple fact that you are a beneficiary of that system, or you were a beneficiary of that in the very first place to begin with. But then secondly, notice how the only then response then I then get at second is that printing press, etc., you only did so because you were investing in that field, etc. I'm unsure on as to why that's necessarily the case. But at third, the only thing that they then have is that historically World War I, if it didn't happen, women would have gotten rights a lot earlier. I'm unsure as to which historical event that then they can quantify to me that basically would have gotten these women rights initially. If you're making such bold statements, probably do a better job at proving them in the very first place. Okay, then why do we win this clash? Because these are all the mitigatory responses that they then have to all of our ideas that are still there. Why do we win this clash? For the simple reason that we talked to you about as to how we were the only ones on that capitalism provide a fundamental inalienable right, for example, suffrage, etc., or the right to vote to these women, by simple virtue of the fact that this is the first time in which you were treated indiscriminately, because capitalism simply does not care if whether you're let's say whether you're someone extremely rich, whether you're a male or woman, because at the end of the day it is the best way to make wealth, etc. It's the best way to generate wealth, etc. But secondly, we tell you that this is the only way through which you could bring issues of women into limelight in the very first place, due to things like media, etc. A very good example of this is for example, the Arab Spring, in which you proliferated media to such an extent that you actively had these issues coming into limelight, etc. For all given reasons, simply because this is a fundamental inalienable right and for the simple reason that they simply do not have a moral clash within this, I think we take this debate there and then. But secondly, this issue about how on their side of the house you'll have things like corporate feminism, etc. I have a couple of responses to it. Firstly, the simple fact that there's an increase in visibility and awareness. That is, while it is true that some corporations may use feminist messaging for profit, the increased visibility and awareness that come from these campaigns is so much more that it quite literally takes away from all of the harms. Secondly, there's incremental change and pressure for authenticity. That is, that even if it's performative or not, corporate feminism places pressure on companies to adhere to their public commitments, because as consumers become more discerning, there's a growing demand for things like authenticity and accountability, all of which are due to things like capitalism. But then secondly, there's empowerment through economic opportunities. We've given to you host and so much reason at first, but the simple reason that you have things like job creation and economic independence, because capitalist enterprises, regardless of their motives, provide job and economic opportunities for women. So employment and financial independence are fundamental aspects of feminist empowerment. That is the only way through which you can bring those issues, or you can bring corporate accountability present in the very first place. But then secondly, or corporate policies and benefits, that is, that many corporations adopt policies that support gender equality and work-life balance, for example, due to things like virtue signaling, etc. So for example, things like maternity leave or flexible working hours and diversity initiatives, all of which prove that they have an interest due to things like virtue signaling, or simply by virtue of the fact that they live in a hyper competitive environment in which you have to compete with other companies, etc. This necessarily means that they're more likely to include these people in the very first place to begin with. Okay then, why do we win this clash then? Because we successfully proven to you but the second idea within this, that only elitist people climb up the ladder and most of other people are left off. I'm unsure as to that presumes that only white people go to work. I don't know, my mother is a teacher, she goes to work every day. I'm unsure as to why that's true. But the thing that then disproves is they concede that only elitist people climb up the ladder. They say what this then concedes is that people actively are being benefited, or they are climbing the ladder. So insofar as I proved to you as to why a vast majority of people would do so, change is just more on our side of the house. Why is that so? Because here's the thing, right? You have things capitalism breeds things like innovation, competition, etc. For example, the fact that you need to have a nuance, etc. You need to have a unique selling point. All of which necessarily means that these people are in active competition, and the simple fact that that this was the first time to which you could assign value, which then gives them dignity in the very first place. Together with the only ones that give them dignity through assigning value or through actually like mentioning or like crediting the work that they did. Okay, then why do we win this clash? For the simple reason that they've conceded that a big number of people like have benefited from it. We've proven as to a vast majority of people do so. I'm unsure on as to why that's true. But okay, then sure, I'll take a POI.
Women would never have been subjected to insane beauty standards in the absence of capitalism harming their self-esteem. Please engage.
Yeah, okay, I'm coming. Okay, I'll just deal with that now because that's a pretty stupid idea. Here's the thing, right? You say beauty industry, etc., profit off of women, etc. Firstly, ideas about like menstrual hygiene, etc., only came into existence because of capitalism, etc., because it doesn't discriminate between people. But then secondly, this was the old, because here's the thing, that this is the first time in which you're giving women importance, in that women are the people that are at the forefront of your advertisements, etc. So this is the only way through which you're basically giving them importance for the first time. Thirdly, you have things like choice, etc., all of which exist within this. Okay, then, but what's the second thing that they then say within this clash? The second thing that they then say within this clash is that you have things like the sex industry, etc. Here's the thing, right? Sex industry is probably one of the like oldest professions, etc., out there. For example, the simple fact that it was, I don't know, made in like 2400 BCE. But here's the thing, that on your side of the house, you're basically going into or buying into that patriarchal like structure or that patriarchal narrative. Because on our side of the house, we tell you that it's your body, you can do whatever you want to do with it. So on your side of the house, you're actively hurting women in the very first place to begin with. But what do we tell you within this debate? We've told, on the practical aspect, we've told you as to how in the contemporary world people are far better off simply by virtue of the fact that you have things like women are a big market to tap into. Women are units of, for example, economic productivity. Women are, for example, capitalism wants to encompass the world. Capitalism cares about things like innovation, diversity, and it's likely to include feminism within this. We've successfully proven in our demonstration of contemporary benefit to the feminist movement, for example, looks like how they are being politically represented within the current status quo for all given reasons.
Thank you for that fine speech. We now move on to the reply speeches for this round. To that end, I call upon the reply speaker for the opposition. Here.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Kava.
All right. I'll be starting my speech in just a second. Yeah, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. If the best POI that Westminster can ask my third opposition is something as insignificant as beauty standards being created by capitalism, as is inexclusive as that argument that they made, I'm pretty sure that's representative of how they've terribly lost this debate. But even if they talk about beauty standards, etc., I'll just start with these things, these miscellaneous arguments they made in terms of beauty standards instead of the sex industry, etc. I'm pretty sure that if we're talking about religion that was mostly decided to ascribe value to people beforehand, you still had traditional notions of femininity, which is why you have beauty standards, not necessarily a consequence of capitalism. But we also told you that you actually create products curtailed towards women that they actually appreciate and buy. The fact that you have products, beauty products, etc., is not just because of beauty standards, because maybe women actually do like applying these these things. Like I know people think that it is a very therapeutic experience applying a face mask, etc. So I'm pretty sure that's something that does not exist. But also, we told you that the sex industry is a historical phenomenon. Brothels, etc. existed. But I think that even this argument is rooted in the sexist bigotry that you espouse towards these women. If that is your body and you want to choose how to profit off of it, and the fact that you are able to lead a better life because of things like OnlyFans, etc., I think that that's something that's completely justified. I'm not sure why that is actually something feminist in and of itself. But then let's talk about what this debate was actually about. Number one, could feminism have existed without capitalism? Maybe it could have. Would it have been successful? Absolutely not. I'm pretty sure that it would not have been as efficacious for sure, because the overarching frame needed to provide space for a certain movement, needed to be something that was beneficial for you at that point in time. In the absence of capitalism, which was indiscriminate, which only cared about ascribing worth based on productivity, potential markets, which is blind to your gender, which is blind to your ethnicity, which is blind to your religion, the overarching frame would have been religion, which is bigotrous and conservative, saying that women can only be passive actors in the home, or biology, which historically set up men as hunter-gatherers and pushed women as home workers, which looked like the monarchy, which asserted that only male heirs could inherit the kingdom, and primogeniture was something that was standard policy. I think at that point in time, you could not have said that feminism would have been successful if there was not a favorable overarching frame. That was our argument. You never engaged with it. But feminism was definitely catalyzed by capitalism. You literally had things like voting rights being given to you, because again, this is a retrospective evaluation of harm versus benefit of capitalism for feminists. If capitalism did get you those voting rights, because political representation is probably the most important thing, etc., or economic power, because again, you're able to use that to elicit demands, etc., from powerful actors, I think that those things are very, very important in a retrospective view. But also, we said that economic importance was something that you actually used. Why? Because in the absence of this shift from notions of what mattered, ordinary people in life, that looks like what people did not have rights, etc., before the advent of capitalism. People from religious minorities or ethnic minorities, people who were black individuals or women, etc., who were not given rights, there was no place in the world for them. The place was created by capitalism. It inherited the idea of libertarianism, the libertarian approach of power distribution, saying that anyone can have capital, and the American dream, etc. You had things like education, infrastructure, and stuff like that also being created, and you also had media, etc. But the last question in this debate on whether there is contemporary benefit from capitalism, we think there is. We gave you literally 7 incentives for why capitalism will cater to women. The fact that they're hard for the global market, the fact that they're units of economic productivity, the fact that it is proven that women are better academically. The only reason, again, why sociological researchers were able to fund research that actively disempowered notions of the gender gap, notions that were patriarchal, was because of the social mobility and the economic power that they got because of capitalism, a system which did not discriminate against them for the first time in their life. Capitalism wants things like innovation and diversity, but also capitalism today is something that is somewhat seen as a bad thing. At that point in time, the brand image of these corporations really matter. Virtue signaling, goodwill, etc., is going to make them be more feminist in and of itself. But women benefited off of capitalism. They got economic importance, and they asserted this economic importance by lobbying politicians, etc., in the long term. Even if white women are doing this, or white women are championing their rights, they did not have rights 200 years ago. The situation is much, much comparatively better. They had zero alternatives. But even if white women are fighting for their rights, there's going to be macro legislation that's good for all women. Even their existence in of itself is going to inspire someone in the global south, or the fact that ideas are proliferated through the global media are going to do that. Their last idea was just, oh, you're going to be exhausted. I think that the only reason why you have maternity leave or any redress for pregnancy difficulties is literally capitalism. These arguments are already rebutted. Clearly, because of all of these arguments you've given, how this debate has been, never been prouder to oppose.
Thank you for that fine speech. We now call upon Proposition Reply to conclude this debate as a here. Yes, you are. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'll just leave. Okay. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1, go. If I didn't know JT was an all-boys school before this debate, I definitely know now. Couple of issues within this debate, right? Firstly, I just want to point out that all of our positive speaker case and all of our positive argumentation still stands within this debate. Because what did we tell you? We told you a girl boss narrative exists. Why is this problematic? Because that means you have double trouble for women. When you work for 9 to 5 and then you come home and do more work, right? This also manifests in developing countries and it's extremely more harmful. Secondly, we told you that the sex industry exists, right? And they tell us that the sex work has always existed, but industrialization of that sex industry came as an advent of capitalism. This is really important because what does the sex industry look like in the current status quo? It looks like you're actively exploiting women, right? When you do not have proper worker rights within the sex industry, wherein they fear saying no to sexual activities. This is really important argumentation that you simply not engage with, right?
third thing I told you was the idea of consumerism, right? Where beauty standards being amplified because people want to sell goods. So even if previously beauty standards existed, they have been amplified and marketed and advertised. And the power of advertising here is really important because that was the announcement I gave you, right? We also climate catastrophe, right? Wherein the climate catastrophe leads to so many disadvantages for women, right? They never engage with these argumentation. They're only trying to run parallel debate, right? So what will I do within this reply speech? I'll explain to you like how their argumentation, just like A, we wanted to refute it, and B is just not important, especially compared to our argumentation, right? So what was their argumentation? They brought like two lines of argumentation. Firstly, capitalism is indiscriminate in who can achieve a success, right? We gave three responses to this. Firstly, we told you that that's literally not true because classism exists because of capitalism, wherein capitalism has an incentive to make sure some people have holdings of wealth and other people do not, because capitalism is built on the ideology of like trying to like have entrepreneurship and stuff like that. Therefore, you need to have some people who do not have access to that wealth and thus have an incentive to do that, right? So classism exists because of capitalism, right? But second reason that capitalism is not indiscriminate, and second reason that we gave you was the idea that capitalism does not have an incentive to repair past harm, because things like social welfare programs look away from things like development of industries, right? So when you have things like slavery existing and colonialism existing, you never have an incentive to give reparations. And because capitalism is based on the idea of scarcity and competition amongst the masses, these women will always be left behind, right? So who will go in top in like capitalist societies? It'll be men, and then sometimes like one in a million chance of a white woman rising from the glass ceiling, right? I think that's still a huge harm on their side because other women are always going to be cut off, right? The third thing that we then told you is that this is like not true because they didn't co-opt, capitalism co-opted previous like harmful ideologies instead of altering those, right? So for example, we gave you the idea of the nuclear family, which is like upheld by religious conservatism and like promoted by religious conservatism, and capitalism did not try to alter this, right? Because note in the nuclear family, you have the system of like the man being like the provider and the woman being the homemaker, right? This is something that's beneficial for capitalism because you would say like one household for one like family, etc. Therefore, capitalism co-opted this. This is an analysis that we gave that completely takes all of this argumentation down, and they have nothing to stand upon on this debate, right? The second argumentation that we then got was like printing press and social media exist, right? We've already proven how this is inexclusive because dispelling information, everyone can always have an incentive to do so. The government will always have an incentive to do so. Inventors will always have an incentive to do so. This argumentation that they simply got engaged with, and they're completely running a parallel debate, right? But let's say you buy all of this. Let's weigh this up for you, right? Why is their arguments is not as good as ours, right? Because they prioritize individual benefit over collective benefit. Because the debate about the feminist movement like needs to prioritize things like collective benefit. Because that is why you have things like marches and protests existing, right? That is the incentive of the feminist movement to have more followers because you rally for collective change, to get legislation, etc. When you only prioritize individual benefit, that is not fulfilling the function of the feminist movement, and we do fulfill those, right? I think the second reason that their arguments are just not important is because they only cater to the global north, right? And even women on the global north aren't that benefited, right? Because they're used as tokens of like women achieving change and success. For all these reasons, we bring greater benefit to everyone prior to propose.
Thank you very much for that speech, and to you all for this debate. Kindly exit this room because we'll announce the verdict in the main hall after deliberation. Thanks.
Thank you for the debate, guys. Lovely discourse.
Thank you for the debate.
Please leave. I mean, in a better tone, I suppose.
Asad Zafar, please leave. Great. Is there anybody else जिसको हमने remove करना है?
Hasan Bhatt अभी रहे.
Hasan Bhatt, please leave this room.
और ये JT Quick का एक और boy भी है. उसको कैसे
मैं
निकालना
remove
है?
कर देती हूँ. Wait.
Let me do it. Yes, I did it. Right.
और भी हैं.
और boy भी है. Oh, Allah, चलो. Man, removing them is so satisfying.
There's one more.
एक सेकेंड इसको भी निकालना है. चलो निकाल.
ये अली जो है. Okay.
All right then. So the way that we should go about this deliberation is that we'll have 2 minutes of time to think about it, and then you have to give each other the verdict. If you already have a verdict, then I guess type it and send it to me in the private chat thing or WhatsApp it. I don't care.
Wait, I forgot to turn off the recording. मैं बंद करती हूँ एक second.